A man once believed he had excellent judgment, not because he had tested it deeply, but because nothing in his life had seriously challenged it. He trusted what he saw, what he heard, and what he felt, assuming that his perception of the world was accurate, stable, and complete. To him, reality was simple. Things were as they appeared, people were as they behaved, and situations meant what they seemed to mean. That belief stayed intact for years, until a small, almost insignificant situation forced him to question it. He was sitting with two people after a meeting. The conversation was normal, nothing unusual, until one of them mentioned how uncomfortable the meeting had been. The man was surprised because from his perspective, everything had gone well. There had been no obvious tension, no conflict, no visible problem. So he asked, "What do you mean?" The first person said, "Didn't you notice how he avoided answering that question? He clearly didn't want to commit. It felt disrespectful." Before the man could respond, the second person said, "I didn't see it like that at all. To me, he looked hesitant, not disrespectful. It seemed like he was under pressure and didn't know how to respond." Now there were three people in the same room who had all experienced the same event, and yet each one had a different version of what had happened. One saw avoidance and disrespect. Another saw hesitation and pressure. And the man who had noticed none of it saw a normal conversation. That moment didn't feel important at the time, but it introduced something that is difficult to ignore once you see it. Reality is not experienced directly, it is interpreted. What you see is not a complete picture of what is happening. It is a version constructed by your brain, shaped by past experiences, expectations, emotional state, and attention. Your brain does not process everything. It cannot. There is too much information. Every second, your senses take in more data than you could ever consciously handle, so your brain filters it. It selects what seems relevant, discards what seems unnecessary, and fills in gaps where information is incomplete. That means that what you experience is not raw reality. It is a simplified, edited version of it. And most of the time, you are not aware that this is happening. You assume that what you see is accurate. You assume that what you understood is complete. You assume that your interpretation is correct. But in many cases, part of that interpretation was constructed, not observed. This becomes clear when two people interpret the same situation differently. Think about a simple example. You send a message, the reply is short. Immediately, your brain starts to interpret it. Maybe you think the person is annoyed, or uninterested, or distant, but those are not facts. They are conclusions. And they are based on limited information. Your brain is filling the gap. It does not like uncertainty, so instead of waiting for more data, it creates meaning, often quickly, often automatically. And once that meaning is created, something else happens. Your brain starts to protect it. It looks for confirmation. If you believe the person is annoyed, you start noticing things that support that idea. Their tone, their timing, their previous behavior. At the same time, you ignore signals that contradict it. This is not because you are trying to be biased. It is because your brain is trying to be efficient. It prefers a stable interpretation over constant reevaluation. This is why first impressions are so strong. The moment your brain forms an idea about someone, it starts building around it. Not because it is always correct, but because it is easier than starting from zero every time. Now take this beyond messages and conversations. Think about how often you assume intention. Someone looks at you briefly. You assume something. Someone does not respond. You assume something. Someone behaves differently. You assume something. In most of these situations, you do not have enough information to know what is actually happening. But your brain does not wait. It fills the gap. And once it fills it, the interpretation feels real, not like a guess, like a fact. This is where many misunderstandings come from, not from what happened, but from how it was interpreted. Now, here is where it becomes more important. Because this does not only affect how you see others, it affects how you see yourself. You interpret your own actions, your own decisions, your own results, and those interpretations shape your beliefs. If something does not go well, your brain creates an explanation, sometimes accurate, sometimes not. But once that explanation is formed, it becomes part of how you see yourself. And over time, those interpretations become patterns. Those patterns become beliefs. And those beliefs influence behavior, all starting from interpretation, not from objective reality. Now consider how often you question your own perception. Not often, because it feels solid. But if you start observing more carefully, you begin to notice something. You do not react to situations. You react to your interpretation of them. And that difference matters. Because if the interpretation changes, the reaction changes. The situation can stay the same, but the experience becomes completely different. This is why awareness is important, not because it changes reality, but because it allows you to question your version of it, instead of assuming that what you think is automatically true. Now let's take this further, because interpretation is not random. It follows patterns. Your past experiences influence what you expect, and what you expect influences what you see. If you have had negative experiences in a certain situation, your brain becomes more alert in similar situations. It looks for signals, even small ones, and when it finds them, it amplifies them, because it is trying to protect you. But in doing so, it can also distort what is actually happening. You may react to something that is not fully there, or miss something that is. This is not a flaw. It is a mechanism. But like any mechanism, it can work well or poorly depending on how it is used. The key is not to remove it. It is to recognize it, to see when your brain is interpreting instead of observing, to pause before turning a thought into a conclusion, to question what feels obvious. Because often, what feels obvious is simply familiar, not necessarily accurate. Now think back to the man in the beginning. Nothing changed in the meeting. The same words were said, the same actions happened. But 3 different interpretations were created, and each one felt real to the person who experienced it. That is how perception works. Not as a mirror of reality, but as a construction of it. And once you understand that, something changes. You stop reacting immediately. You create a small gap between what happens and what you think it means. And in that gap, you gain something that most people don't use: choice. The choice to question, the choice to wait, the choice to see more before deciding. Because reality is not always what it first appears to be. And the more aware you become of that, the more clearly you begin to see. Subscribe and like for more. Subscribe and like for more.